Sobrang haba ang ticket. Patapos ako sa
We have the ticket. We have the ticket.
Asa barkuhaan eh?
Ano? Ha?
Boy, architecture na yun eh. Lamaya.
Saan ginag-usok doon mo?
Amin lang kung pagpapakating ni Virginia. Manahong ka kaya ni Virginia.
Thank you.
Dapat ano, kami kaya wala ko eh.
Di na ba nih mau lagi sigli? Harap. Thank you. Setengah. Oke.
Makita mo nila ito dito.
Sige, diha mo dia.
Ikaw po.
Ang pagburo ni ko guys, aga pa doon dito.
Asa magkuha ni?
Adult-sized life jackets for all those over 90 pounds, and child-sized life jackets for all those under 90 pounds are found in these white deck boxes located throughout the vessel, and additionally in that locker on the port side. I do not anticipate needing to use these life jackets tonight, but in case of an emergency, our capable crew dressed in orange will come around, strip these life jackets, and try to put one of them on. Additionally, there is no standing or kneeling on any of these wooden benches, no sitting on an outside wooden rail, and please don't lean out over the side of the boat. There's also a non-smoking and non-vaping vessel. We're equipped with restrooms. They're all located towards the stern. Back there you'll also find Jesse, your bartender, and a full-service bar serving up delicious beverages throughout the tour. Except perhaps the last 10 or so minutes. This is our final ride of the evening, but Jesse is open right now, so grab yourself a delicious drink to go with your boat ride. The bar is cashless. You will need a credit or debit card to pay for your purchase, although Jesse will graciously accept cash tips. One final thing, if anytime during the tour you feel the need to have a loud conversation or talk on your cellular telephone, don't. Instead, listen to Stephanie. Stephanie back there is your docent, our tour guide for the next 75 minutes. You'll be able to living an excellent tour. So without further ado, let's go for a boat ride.
Yay!
Everyone.
Hello!
How are we doing out there?
Oh, good.
Awesome. Best energy on the boat all day. I love that. My name is Stephanie, and I'm going to be the docent or tour guide this evening. Docent is just a fancy word that means tour guide. It comes from the Latin word docere, which means to teach. But don't let that freak you out. We're going to learn a lot, but mostly we're going to have a ton of fun. I always like to start every tour just by taking a quick little survey, just a show of hands, so I can get to know all of you a little bit better. I would love to know, is anyone on the boat from Chicago, or do you live here currently? Yeah, a few people. Okay, great. Welcome locals. Always happy to have you. I can then probably safely assume that everybody else is at least from out of town. So what about outside of the state of Illinois? Anyone here from outside of the state? Yes, I knew there'd be a few people. Welcome. Let's go further than that. What about outside of the region? You do not live in the Midwest. You're not from the Midwest. Excellent. Any international visitors on board? Anyone from out of the country? Incredible. Welcome, everyone. So happy to see you here. This is such a special activity. Just by stepping onto this boat, you have accepted your invitation to one of the most exclusive and celebrated tours in the world. The Shoreline Sightseeing 75-minute architectural boat tour down the Chicago River. And I really want you to think about this tour as though you are walking down a red carpet. A red carpet? Looks more like a wet carpet, but here's why I call it that. We're gonna see some incredible buildings, the iconic figures of Chicago. We're also gonna meet some of the rising stars, maybe some people, some buildings you have never heard of before ever in your life. We will be admiring what all of the buildings are wearing and learning a little bit about the designers behind them, the architects themselves. We also get to explore this idea of the evolution of architecture. Throughout history, each style of architecture has been directly influenced by all the ones that came before it. So we're really gonna let that take center stage on our tour today. And you all will have a number of roles to play. You get to be the adoring architecture fans. And of course, no red carpet would be complete without the raving paparazzi. So you can have your cameras out, take plenty of photos. You're welcome to get up to get a drink or use the restroom. But like I mentioned earlier, just make sure you're not blocking anyone else's view. And like Captain Ben mentioned, if you need to have a loud conversation, don't. I don't want to hear it. I want to make sure everyone can see and hear all the awesome stuff we're going to be learning about today. But with all that being said, we're going to kick things off. We're going to get this party started. Lights, camera, action! Yeah.
Yay!
We always begin by crossing underneath the Lakeshore Drive Bridge. One of the busiest highways in Chicago runs over the top of this bridge, and just last year it got an addition to its name. Its full name is now the Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable Lakeshore Drive Bridge, and it's named after the man who is widely considered the founding father of Chicago, Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable. He was the first permanent non-native settler to make his home in this area, a Haitian immigrant and a fur trader who moved to this area of the country in the 1770s to establish a fur trading post, which he did very successfully. And actually, when he lived here, this area of the country was called Chicagoa, which is the Potawatomi word, the local indigenous tribe's word that means stinky onion. And it references the vegetables that used to grow on the banks of the Chicago River. So if you've ever been in New York City, you'll know that they get to call themselves the Big Apple.
Like 1 minute.
And good for them. They can have it. Chicago, we get to be the big stinky onion.
Yay!
Lucky us. Now, the first real celebrity architect that we're going to meet today is a woman by the name of Jeanne Gang. And she's kind of the it girl of the Chicago architecture scene. We've got one of her buildings right here on the left-hand side of the river. 1, 2, 3 undulating towers of the St. Regis Hotel. Now, the hotel is actually just in the bottom floors of this building, and it's not open quite yet. It's slated to open in early 2023. However, there are already people living in some of the luxury residences up in those 3 tallest towers, some of which are still available to purchase. And we can go over pricing, things like that a little bit later on in the tour. There are 6 different shades of gradient blue and green glass on the outside of this building. Really great metaphor for how Jeanne Gang is actually kind of shattering glass ceilings in a lot of ways. For example, the St. Regis is the 3rd tallest building in Chicago after Willis Tower and after Trump Tower. However, this right here is the tallest building in the world, designed by a female-led architecture firm. Isn't that awesome? Yeah, we got applaud Jeanne Gang. We're very proud of her. She's kind of a hometown hero in that way. There's more I want to share about the St. Regis, but we need a little bit more context about the history of architecture before we really get into it. So we'll come back to it a little bit later on in the tour. But we're gonna head just a little bit further down, just a couple doors, to this building with the super reflective, kind of silvery glass on the front. Almost looks like it's jutting out towards us. This is Swiss Hotel, designed by architect Harry Weiss in the 1980s. And as we float on by the front, you'll be able to see exactly what shape it's built in. It's built in the shape of a giant triangle. That's the point of the triangle, kind of jutting out towards us. Now, Harry Weiss loved triangles. He loved sailing and being on the water, and he thought triangles mimic the shape of the sail on his sailboat. He loved them so much, he tried to incorporate them into almost every single one of his designs. We'll see another one of Harry Weiss's triangularly shaped buildings in just a few minutes, a little bit further up the north branch of the river. If we look off to the right-hand side, you'll see this yellow onion-shaped dome on top of the Intercontinental Hotel. It's going to disappear under the bridge. It'll pop up again on the other side. But I like to think that that onion-shaped dome is paying homage to the stinky onions of Chicago's history. But it was actually built to be a Zeppelin or a blimp more, kind of the predecessor to the helicopter landing pad. After the Hindenburg disaster, the popularity of blimps and Zeppelins fell dramatically, pardon my pun, so it's never actually used in that way. The little bird's nest just behind it, that was turned into a viewing platform for a few years. Now, unfortunately, this whole structure on top is closed to the public, but you can still enjoy it if you're hanging out in downtown Chicago at night after the sun's gone down. Look up, keep your eyes peeled for that onion-shaped dome because you'll see it illuminated in all sorts of beautiful different colors. In fact, most of the skyscrapers do light up in some way or another, and we'll be able to see that near the end of our tour tonight. We're going to stay on the right-hand side and just go a little bit further down to this beautiful white ornate building with the clock tower. This is the Wrigley Building, and that's the same Wrigley as Wrigley Juicy Fruit Chewing Gum and Wrigley Field. The clock tower here is modeled after La Giralda, a cathedral in Sevilla, Spain. This whole building done in a style called Spanish Revivalism. And here's what I mean when I talk about European revivalist styles. In the late 1800s and very early 1900s, American architects still hadn't quite figured out what they wanted their own aesthetic to be. And they were still looking towards older European buildings for inspiration, kind of copying and pasting those designs over here in America in the most American way they knew how, as quickly and as cheaply as possible. The Wrigley Building on the outside has 250,000 uber delicate terracotta tiles that to this day still have to be cleaned by hand. We're going to meet the next door neighbor to the Wrigley Building, just directly in front of the boat, Trump International Hotel and Tower. And when you look all the way up this building, you'll see it's got 1, 2, 3 different setbacks, or patio terraces as they're also called. Now these setbacks are actually the same height as other buildings in this neighborhood. The shortest one on the right-hand side is the same height as the Wrigley Building just next door. The middle one on the left, the same height as Mather Tower, this kind of rocket ship shaped building across the river on the left-hand side. And the third tallest, also on the right, is the same height as the AMA Medical Plaza. That's the black box building behind Trump Tower that we can't really see quite yet. But this is our first example of an architectural style called contextual, site-specific designs that flatter the overall context. So the architect here isn't just plopping a random-looking building down wherever. In his design, he's taking into account everything that's going on around it, not only in the natural environment, but the other buildings as well. Trump Tower was completed in 2009. Lead architect on this project was a man by the name of Adrian Smith, who we often like to refer to as the world's tallest architect. And that's not because he was particularly tall, it's because he has designed some of the world's tallest buildings, including the current world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa in Dubai. Staying on the right-hand side as we meet the iconic twin, almost corncob shaped towers of Marina City. In the 50s and 60s, this area of the river was really industrial, pretty commercial. almost no one was living downtown, and architect Bertrand Goldberg wanted to change that. So he designed Marina City to be kind of self-sustaining. Everything you needed to live would be all in one place. Here's how we did it. On the very top floors, pie slice or petal-shaped apartments. They start off small by the door, but then they get wider as you go out. Below that, a couple of levels of valet parking garages. Then a complex with some restaurants, some retail opportunities. The House of Blues is now downstairs. And most importantly, a place to park your luxury yacht all the way down at the very bottom. And if you're a fan of rock and roll music, you might even recognize Marina City from the cover of the seminal Wilco album, Yankee Hotel Foxtrot. That's a local Chicago band. On the left-hand side, super reflective glass leads all the way up to this Greek temple shape up at the very top. This is 77 West Wacker, designed in a style called Neoclassical. Neo meaning new, and classical meaning classical or old. And all that really means is that the architect of this building was also looking towards the past, but in this case, ancient Greece for inspiration for his design, kind of clarifying it, making it more contemporary. We often call this building the Parthenon on steroids, because it's got this kind of bulked up, almost futuristic look. And I'll give you a fun fact about Ricardo Bofill, the Spanish architect of 77 West Wacker. When he designed his first building, he was actually only 17 years old. Whoa.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't know what you guys were doing at the age of 17, but I certainly wasn't designing buildings.
No,
Gosh,
I know.
I think I was in the school play,
Yeah.
which is just as cool, but I am a little bit biased. On the left-hand side, right up against the water, this area with the staircase and the trees, this is one of 5 distinct rooms of the Chicago Riverwalk. 1.3 miles of open, public, recreational space. Anyone can come down here and hang out. The idea for the Riverwalk was proposed to the city in the year 1909, but it took the city over 100 years to finally build it. And when they did, it cost $112 million. So I think the weather's supposed to be nice for the next few days. Come hang out on the Riverwalk. How else would the city get its money's worth? Next thing we're going to do is cross underneath the double-decker Wells Street Bridge just in front of us. Sometimes, depending on the timing of the tour, we'll be able to see the L train go by on the top platform. If we don't see it now, we'll definitely see it at some point later on. But the train in Chicago is often referred to as the L because a lot of the platforms are elevated up off of the ground. Makes it super easy to get around. Wells Street Bridge is a great example of a classic Chicago-style bridge. It lifts from the middle where those 2 red lights are. Beautiful detailing in the hand railing, although this one is actually an exact replica of the 91-year-old bridge that it replaced about 10 years ago. So hopefully we get another 91 years of use out of it. On the right-hand side, our first glimpse of the Art Deco behemoth that is the Merchandise Mart. Art Deco style architecture is characterized by deep inset windows, long vertical lines, repeating geometric patterns, and metal finishings on the outside. Art Deco started here in America in the late 1920s. This is a time of decadent excess, wealth, optimism about the future. That's why the buildings are so humongous. We've even got this row of giant Pez dispenser heads on the outside. I wish it's what they were. There's no candy involved. They are busts of the titans of industry of Chicago's history, including figures like Montgomery Ward and Marshall Field, the department store king. Lots more to learn about the Merchandise Mart, but we're moving right along. We'll come back. We'll get a better view of it from a different angle. For now, we're crossing into the area of the river called Wolf Point. And this is where all 3 branches of the Chicago River meet in the middle. We're going to make a right-hand turn so we can go up the North Branch for a few short minutes. But first, let's meet this celebrity directly to our left. The Nuveen Building, contextual style architecture. The curve along the front matches the curve of the river just below it. Completed in 1983 and featured in the 1985 classic Chicago film, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. This is the building where Ferris's dad worked.
Wow.
And sometimes I like to wait just to see if Mr. Bueller will wave back at me, but Lately, I have this feeling like I don't think he works there anymore. It's been a couple of years, so can't really blame him. Directly in front of us, another contextual style building, River Point, with its parabolic arches cut out of the top and the bottom. The arch along the bottom allows for the Metra and Amtrak train lines underneath this building to run unhindered. But honestly, I like it for a much more basic reason. Doesn't it look like a giant Hot Pocket? Yeah? Yeah, I knew I wasn't the only hungry person on the boat. Oh, speaking of being hungry, I can pretty much guarantee you that every building we've seen so far and every building we're going to see after this next one has been 100% vegetarian and vegan. But that is not the case for Fulton House, this red brick square building just directly in front of us. Fulton House is one of the oldest buildings that we have on the river. It was built in the late 1890s to be the cold storage facility for a meat processing company. So this whole building worked basically like a giant freezer. Now that company closed in 1971. You can probably tell there's some pretty nice apartments going on the inside right now. But before they could turn this building into apartments, they had to wait 3 whole months just for this building to defrost. It was basically a giant block of ice. And when they went inside to do the renovations, they found 4-foot thick walls stuffed full of horsehair and cork that was being used as insulation to help keep the building cold. So definitely not vegetarian, but it's fine. We'll hop back on our healthy regimen, crossing underneath the Carroll Street Railroad Bridge. That's this bridge that's always stored in the upright position. It's been decommissioned since 1999, but it still does work. Got that massive concrete counterweight on the end that helps it work like a giant seesaw. Only goes up and down once a year, and it's really only if it needs maintenance, just to make sure it's still safe for us to pass underneath. On the left, just past Fulton House, triangularly shaped river cottages, also designed by architect Harry Weiss. I remember him, he loved triangles. More nautical inspiration in the round, almost porthole-esque windows built in. And I love the river cottages. They've got this great kind of bohemian look to them, even though the price certainly is not. The one third from the left recently sold for $2.25 million.
Oh, expensive, huh?
But I don't know. I mean, there's a fair amount of us here right now. If we all pool our money together, I bet we could actually get a really nice doorknob inside one of those apartments. So let me know if you want to go in on that with me. On the right-hand side, this blue warehouse-shaped building, this is the East Bank Club. It's kind of a high-end luxury health club, workout center. Lots of celebrities have worked out here. It's also reminiscent of a time where it wasn't as desirable as it is now to have property that faced the river. The river used to be significantly smaller and stinkier than it is now. So this is actually the back side of the East Bank Club we're looking at. We'll see some even older buildings on our tour tonight that also have their backs facing the river. We're on the North Branch right now, and in just a second or two, Captain Ben is actually going to turn the boat around so we can head down the South Branch, see what's going on down there. I'm going to hop off the mic for a few short minutes, kind of wander my way back, see if anyone has any questions so far. This is a great chance for you to get a drink from Jesse at the bar or to use any of the restrooms, and we'll be back on our red carpet cruise in just a few short minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Inday. Sil. Kupte na diba? Sil. Kupte na kay mulapay ko na ba?
Pictures.
Yeah, mulapay ko.
All right, friends, we are hopping back onto our red carpet cruise, coming up the north branch of the river. Now we're gonna head down the south branch, see what's going on down there. Before we do, though, we have to cross again through the area of the river called Wolf Point. And this is where all three branches of the Chicago River meet in the middle. When they meet, they actually form the shape of a giant capital letter Y. And this Y shape is often stylized and printed on other buildings and structures all over the city of Chicago. It's what we call the municipal device. It looks like the capital Y with a circle around it. So keep your eyes peeled because you never know where else in the city you're gonna see it. Kind of like Chicago's version of a hidden Mickey, if you've ever been into that sort of thing. But Wolf Point, this area of the river's got some really interesting technology going on the inside. And I really want to point out the technology that's inside of 150 North Riverside. That's this building on the right-hand side. It's got that Y-shaped cantilevered base. The base of this building is only about 39 feet across, and it only takes up 20% of the plot of land that it's built on. Looks a little precarious, right? I mean, it's a tall building and we're in Chicago. This is the Windy City. So you might not be surprised to learn that most of the skyscrapers here will actually sway in the wind on a really windy day. Now this sway is called drift. And there are three big ways that architects counteract drift with their designs. And we're gonna learn about all three. But let's focus on the first one. If you were to go all the way up to the very top floor of 150 North Riverside, you would find gigantic tanks of water. About 160,000 gallons of water inside these tanks, calibrated in a way that when the building sways in the wind, the water in the tanks sloshes in the opposite direction and kind of swallows or dampens the inertia caused by that swaying building. That's why these tanks of water are called inertial dampers. We'll learn about the other two ways architects counteract drift later on in the tour, but we're going to meet our next celebrity, the Bank of America building, the tallest office building built in Chicago since the year 1990. Also has some really interesting stuff going on at its base. Now there is an ordinance in Chicago that any new building built along the river has to have at least a 30-foot setback at its base. And this setback allows for there to be public access to the waterfront. And you can see how the Bank of America building does it. The first 3 floors are set back 30 feet. The rest of the floors hang over. They're supported by these metal-covered steel beam tripod legs, leaving plenty of space for people to walk by up at the top, and also for the Cafe by the River down at the very bottom. I mentioned at the very beginning of the tour how we're going to explore this idea of the evolution of architecture. And this is the perfect place on the river to do it. So we're actually going to step off of our red carpet and we're going to step onto a time machine. Because the next 5 buildings we're looking at were all built along the river in chronological order. And we start on the right-hand side at the beautiful Art Deco 2 Riverside Plaza. Art Deco, so it's got those deep inset windows, long vertical lines. The lines here often remind me of a pinstripe suit, like something they might wear during the Great Gatsby. And that's the time period we're talking about, late 1920s. Remember, decadence, excess, wealth, optimism about the future, but what happened at the end of the 1920s? The stock market plummeted, sent America hurtling into the Great Depression, and almost as soon as that was over, World War II began. And for nearly 30 years, almost no new office buildings were built in the United States, including here in Chicago. People didn't need them, they didn't have the resources to build them. But post-World War II, they get a new, conservative, austere movement of architecture called Black Box Modernism. This first building on the right, this is Gateway Center 1, and its identical twin, Gateway Center 2, is directly down the street. Now, we use the words conservative and austere to describe Black Box Modernism because of the way these buildings look. There's no ornate detail. It's all simple lines, sharp right angles, and really kind of harsh, dark colors. Now, this movement was founded by a German architect, Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and he really believed that less is more. He believed in the practicality and the functionality of a building over anything else. And when you think about this generation, these are people who lived through the Great Depression, the Second World War. They didn't have time to sit around and argue about how many gargoyles they were going to put on a building. But then at the beginning of the 70s, architects take one look at Black Box Modernism and they're bored. They want to loosen up, get more creative, which leads them into international style. Gateway Center 3, this white box building, is a softening of, a transition away from Black Box Modernism. Similar features, simple lines, sharp right angles. This one's white instead of black, and it's really meant to be kind of timeless, sort of generic. You could find this style of building anywhere in the world where buildings were being built after 1970. Then in the 80s, that's when we get contextualism, site-specific designs that flatter the overall context. Gateway Center 4 has this curve along the front that once again matches the curve of the river just below it. And the color and the texture of the glass is meant to mimic the color and the texture of the water in the river. So our time machine really begins all the way back at the Wrigley Building, European revivalist styles. Then American architects get their own style, Art Deco, 1920s. Then they go conservative, austere, post-World War II, Black Box Modernism. They get bored, they loosen up in the 70s with international style, finishing in the 80s with contextualism. Now, for all my friends on board who are not from Chicago, you might not have any idea where on earth you currently are, but don't worry, I got up super early this morning and I put a giant "You Are Here" map on the side of this building just for you guys. That red brick halfway up shows you exactly where we are on the river, and you can even see the Y shape of Wolf Point directly above it.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna get right back onto our red carpet because our next celebrity here at the corner has already made its feature film debut. Some of you might know this building as Gotham City Bank from the opening sequences of the Christopher Nolan Batman film, The Dark Knight, starring Heath Ledger. Although the real name of this building is the Old Main Post Office. In the 20s and 30s, Chicago was the mail order catalog capital of the world. They needed a massive post office to handle all of that mail. And what better architectural style than Art Deco with its deep inset windows and long vertical lines. Recently, there was an almost a $1 billion renovation project, turned this building into offices for companies like Uber, Walgreens, Pepsi. It is so big, the highway runs directly through the middle of this building, and there's even a 3-acre large garden all the way up on the roof. It's not open to the public, unfortunately. 3 acres of tall prairie grass, plenty of places to kind of kick back and relax, and even a few basketball courts on the roof of this building. So it's a nice little glimpse into how the other half works. But I do want to, while we're here, I feel like I should admit something to you all. And I already know some of you are not going to like hearing this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm going to speak my truth. I don't actually like talking about Batman on the tour. I know that there's a handful of buildings in Chicago that were all featured in the Christopher Nolan Batman films, but listen, if I wanted someone to stand up here and lecture you all about Batman for an hour, I would have asked literally any one of my ex-boyfriends to come and lead this tour. They weren't available, thank God. And you know, people do like Batman, so I at least try to point out the Old Main Post Office. Okay, we're gonna head further down the south branch of the river, but we're gonna switch gears. We've heard some facts, now we're gonna tell some stories. Because I know you all are wondering, you're desperate to know, I can see it in your eyes. Stephanie, how did Chicago become this sort of walk of fame of architecture that we know it is today? I mean, this is really the place to see and be seen if you're an architect. And there are 3 moments in history that led to that reputation. And the first one is the Great Chicago Fire. And I'll set the scene for you. It's 9 p.m. at night on October 8th, 1871, and a fire breaks out in the barn of Mrs. Catherine O'Leary. She was an Irish Catholic immigrant who lived in this area, and she didn't actually live too far from where we are right now, only about 2 blocks off in that direction, off the right-hand side of the boat. Now, we know for a fact that the fire started in her barn, and there is one kind of big prevailing theory about how, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But you might be wondering, well, Stephanie, shouldn't the river serve as a natural barrier for that fire? But that night, there were 30-mile-per-hour winds whipping around the city. Picked up that fire, carried it across the river, and almost like a fire tornado, where it caught on to all the wood buildings that were here before and ended up burning for 3 days. Now, when that fire was finally contained, 17,500 buildings had been destroyed. 300 people had died, and 100,000 people had been displaced from their homes. This is a big tragedy, and the city was angry. They really wanted someone to blame, and they decided to blame, of all people, or rather, of all creatures, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary's cow. Yeah, they blamed her cow. They really wanted people to think that this cow had purposely kicked over that lantern because it wanted to burn down the city of Chicago. It's a little ridiculous, but you know, also, I grew up around cows, and I have known some pretty vindictive cows, okay? I mean, they can be really mean. They've got big teeth, ugly feet, and also not unlike most of my ex-boyfriends, but this is the worst thing to ever happen. In a way, though, it was also kind of the best, because what's more attractive to a group of up-and-coming architects than an entire city that has to be completely rebuilt from the ground up? And it's at this moment that architects from all over the country come here to Chicago. They want to test out their new ideas, their new technology, and this is actually when the skyscraper is invented. Previously, buildings were being made out of wood, brick, really heavy material without a lot of infrastructure, so they couldn't actually be all that tall. But with the introduction of the steel frame, significantly lighter, buildings can now stop being built out and start being built up. So let's fast forward about 22 years in the future. The year is now 1893, and this is the year that Chicago is chosen to host the World's Fair. City officials really want to use this opportunity to show the rest of the world how great they're doing, rebuilding their second city after this tragic fire. So they hire architect Daniel Burnham to design the campus for the World's Fair. Daniel Burnham loves European-style architecture. He gets a committee of architects together, and they create this almost Venetian-style city near the south side of Chicago to be the campus for the World's Fair. And it's really successful. 27 million people from all over the world end up going through the turnstiles of the fair that year. And I think it's because they wanted to check out all the cool new stuff that was being introduced at the fair that year. And included in this list of cool new stuff was the zipper, but most of us are wearing a zipper today in some capacity, Cracker Jack, cream of wheat breakfast cereal. Here's another unpopular opinion for you, but I actually really like cream of wheat breakfast cereal. The brownie was invented for the World's Fair. They wanted a cake that you could hold in your hand, eat while walking around the fair that wouldn't make too much of a mess. So that's where we get the much denser brownie. The Ferris wheel made its debut, as did the very first iteration of the dishwasher. I know my life would be significantly worse if not for the dishwasher. And last but not least, this is the time and the place that Pabst Beer wins their blue ribbon and becomes PBR, that I know we all know and love. We love drinking it, it's so good. College students across the nation rejoiced at the World's Fair of 1893. But like I said, super successful. And just a handful of years later, city officials go back to Daniel Burnham. They want to rehire him for a new project that they have in mind. They want him to revamp the entire city, make it look better and work better. Daniel Burnham's a little nervous. I don't think he really knew that his design for the World's Fair was going to be his audition for this next kind of bigger, more significant project. But he also knows he's a genius architect, and he accepts his challenge. He ends up creating what is now referred to as the Burnham Plan of 1909. This is one of the first kind of comprehensive city plans in our nation's history. And so much of what looks great and works great about Chicago comes from this plan. Daniel Burnham, I'll give you some more background on him. He was a student of an architectural philosophical movement called the City Beautiful movement. And he really believed in beauty for beauty's sake. He thought beauty had a calming, inspiring effect on people. And he used his philosophy to inform a lot of the decisions that he made. And here are some of those decisions. Big one, he clarified the grid system Chicago is built on. Makes it even easier to get around and navigate the city because it's built on a grid. He also introduced 18-foot wide alleyways so Chicagoans could tuck their garbage behind their homes instead of leaving it out on the sidewalk or in the street to get all stinky and smelly. And both the grid system and the alleyways were part of Daniel Burnham's larger plan to have Chicago be what he called a Paris on the Prairie, a hub of art, design, and culture. And he was especially inspired by the city's motto, the Latin phrase urbs in horto, which just means city in a garden. Daniel Burnham wanted everyone, regardless of their socioeconomic status, to be able to live within walking distance of a public park. And because of this, to this day, there are over 600 parks in the city of Chicago, 246 different neighborhoods, and a lot of those neighborhoods are named after the parks that are within them. But this is just a very brief overview of the history of Chicago. The fire destroyed, the fair reanimated, and the plan beautified. How are we doing out there so far? Are we having fun at least?
Yeah.
Sick. Now this building directly to our right, this is called River City. And if this building looks familiar to you, it might be because it was also designed by Bertrand Goldberg. That's the same guy who did the twin corncob-shaped towers of Marina City that we saw earlier on in the tour. Frankly, I find it pretty embarrassing when two celebrities show up to the red carpet wearing the same outfit, but that's fine, they're making it work. Just beyond it is the Reed, R-E-E-D. When this is completed, this will be a kind of luxury residential building, some fancy condos. It's one of many new projects planned for this area of the river. In fact, in about 10 years, the South Branch, where we are right now, is gonna look completely different than it does now. Lots of big projects planned for this area, more residential buildings, a few more public parks as well. So come back to the city in about 10 years, come and take my tour, and we can see together how it's changed. But in all seriousness, when you're walking down a red carpet, who are some of the figures you might see? You might see actors, singers, athletes, maybe even a member of the royal family. And I bet you didn't know, we actually have our own royal family right here in Chicago, and I want to introduce you, but first, I need to know that you're ready to meet them. So, can I see everyone's best kind of princess parade wave? Can we do this? Come on, I know you've all seen Princess Diaries. Okay, that's pretty good. Yes, excellent. Here we go. Directly in front of the boat, this black box building with the two white antennas on top. That is the king of the Chicago skyline, Willis Tower.
Whoa.
Some of you might know this building as Sears Tower. We'll talk about why that might be in just a second. Directly in front of the Sears Willis Tower is the Queen, 311 South Wacker, with her crown of barrels up at the very top. And off to the right-hand side is the very gorgeous Art Deco style Diva Princess, the Chicago Board of Trade, with that 30-foot tall statue of a woman on top.
Oh, okay.
Let's talk about her first. She is a diva. She demands our attention. That statue on top is of the Roman goddess Ceres. She's the goddess of grain and agriculture. And she's on this building because they originally traded agriculture futures there. She's also done in an Art Deco style, really streamlined, not a lot of details. Famously faceless is how we refer to her. And Ceres is actually where we get the words cereal and cerveza, which my friend Jessie is still serving at the bar at the very back of the boat, if you haven't said hi to her yet. Let's meet the queen, 311 South Wacker. That crown of barrels up at the top is illuminated at night with a combination of 2,000 fluorescent and LED lights. Now those lights can actually be so bright that they have to be dimmed during bird migration season, because otherwise birds will mistake this building for the moon and they get all discombobulated. It throws them off their flight path. So we try to do the birds a favor. We dim the lights during the spring and the fall. And last but not least, let's meet the king of the Chicago skyline, the apex of black box modernism, tall, dark, and handsome, like I like all my leading men to be. It's none other than Willis Tower, also known as Sears Tower. Black box building, 2 white antennas on top, 1,451 feet tall, makes this the tallest building in Chicago. It is definitely going to sway in the wind a little bit. However, it does not have inertial slosh dampers. Instead, it has a bundled base. When you look at this building, it almost looks like 9 different smaller towers all bundled together at the base. That gives it more stability at the bottom rather than at the top. Although I do think Willis Tower could benefit from some inertial slosh dampers, because even though it's designed to withstand up to 200-mile-per-hour winds, it can still sway up to 18 inches in any direction on a really windy day. In fact, some people say that when they're in this building, they can feel it swaying back and forth. Some people get a little seasick, and I've also been told that if you're in the bathroom, the water in the toilet bowls will slosh back and forth. But that's a feature. That's what we call a Chicago bidet. So it's actually kind of fancy if you think about it. Now, when buildings are measured for their height, they're always measured from the lowest pedestrian accessible entrance all the way up to either the top of the roof or the top of a spire. But Willis Tower doesn't have spires. Those are TV and radio antennas on top. Antennas are never included in the overall height of a building because they're not structural to the building itself. They're not included in the original design. They get added in later. But if we look down the street at Gateway Center 2 and 1, the black box buildings we talked about earlier on the left, each of these buildings is 280 feet tall, which is the same exact height as the antennas on top of Willis Tower. Now this gap in the buildings right here to the right, this is our last kind of full final view of Willis Tower. So take one last long good look all the way up while I keep talking about it. Did you know we've actually had 2 men scale the outside of Willis Tower? The first was an American man, Dan Goodwin, in the early 80s. We call him Spider Dan because he did it while wearing a Spider-Man costume. And then he was followed in 1999 by Frenchman Alain Robert, who actually, get this, free soloed Willis Tower. That means he climbed up no ropes, no equipment, no idea how he did it, and frankly, I don't want to know. It makes me sick just thinking about it. Now, both of these men did successfully make it all the way to the top of Willis Tower, and they were both successfully arrested the minute that they were done. So don't add it to your itinerary. It is not worth it. Now, lastly, and perhaps most controversially, let's talk about the name. Because if any longtime local to Chicago heard me calling this building Willis Tower, it might be pretty PO'd. Yeah, most locals are very nostalgic. They're still calling it Sears Tower. But on a building like this, you don't actually buy the right equipment. You lease them year by year. So right now, the Willis Insurance Brokerage Company pays $1 million every year just to have their name on the building. It also kind of illustrates that really at any point the name could change again. By the next time you all come to Chicago, it might have a completely different name, although I guarantee you, locals will still be calling it Sears Tower. Yeah. But I'm getting sick of this, okay? I want to be clear. The name of this building is Willis, spelled W-I-L-L-I-S, and pronounced Sears. So keep that in mind for the future.
Okay.
Now we've got another huge Art Deco style building right here at the corner. Deep inset windows, long vertical lines. If you guys learn nothing on this tour, I think you're at least going to learn how to recognize an Art Deco style building. This is the Civic Opera Building, the second largest opera space in North America. It's the largest performing arts venue here in Chicago. The city has over 250 different theater and performing arts companies. The Lyric Opera that works out of this building is just one of them. And everybody likes to point out that there's a typo in the inscription. It says Civic Opera Building. But that's not a typo. They're just using the Latin alphabet to spell that out, where U and V share a letter. Now, U didn't actually get its own letter until the 1600s, so technically it is one of our newest letters. But enough about U. Talk about the Civic Opera Building. It does have kind of a tragic backstory. Opened only 3 weeks after the stock market crash in 1929. They did have to file for bankruptcy not long after that, but they are back up and running. In fact, just a little over a month ago, I went there and saw my favorite musical, Fiddler on the Roof. So good. It was huge. Over 100 people in the cast. On the left-hand side, we've got the Boeing Building, currently headquarters to the Boeing Airline Company. However, this was actually originally intended to be the headquarters for the Morton Salt Company. And you can sort of see that built into the design. If you look all the way up to the roof, there's a steel panel up there. It's got all these holes punched out of it that kind of makes this building look like a giant salt shaker. Isn't that so cutie?
Yeah.
Now our next celebrity is going to be all the way over in Wolf Point, just directly in front of the boat. And if you look all the way up to the top, you'll see it's not quite finished being built yet. When this is completed, this will be Salesforce Tower. It's not going to be any taller than it is now, but it is going to add another 100 yards onto the Riverwalk down at the very bottom. I like to point out Salesforce Tower because we often refer to Chicago as being a living museum of architecture. And how lucky for us that we get to witness one of its newest exhibits right before our very eyes. Now we're going to cross underneath the Lake Street Bridge. And as we do, for all my paparazzi on board, this is going to be the best place on the river for you to get a really good picture of the Merchandise Mart. We talked about it a little bit early on. New angle, voila, in all of its Art Deco glory. Now I'm really going to hammer this home, so say it with me if you remember. It's Art Deco, so it's got deep inset windows, long vertical lines. When the Merchandise Mart was built, this was the largest commercial building in the world. But would you believe me if I told you truthfully that today it's not even in the top 10? When the Pentagon was built, that's what knocked the Merchandise Mart off of its throne as largest commercial building. Still pretty big though. It's got 25 floors, 43 elevators, even has its own train station on the inside. You can take the L train, Brown Line, all the way up to my house. You guys want to hang out later? But I'm going to be here for a while, so just keep that in mind. And at one point, it even had its own zip code. One zip code for the entire building. Today, it's a little bit more generous. It shares that zip code with the other buildings in this neighborhood. And here's my favorite bit of information about the Merchandise Mart. Just the front of it, just so we can see right here, right now, is 2.5 acres large. This building is massive. And the city makes good use of it because for most of the year, they treat it almost like a giant movie screen. You can come down to the Riverwalk every night through November 18th and watch a program called Art on the Mart. Animated art is projected onto the front of the Merchandise Mart. They play some music to go along with it. They have different themes throughout the year. As we come around the bend in the river, follow my finger to that dark glass box that's built into the wall of the Riverwalk. That is the $8 million projector system. It uses lasers to calibrate exactly where the light should be shown on the front of this building. And it does so in a way so that none of the light leaks in through any of the many windows. So you could be working at the Merchandise Mart late at night and you might not even know that there is a light show going on the outside. And that's still happening tonight, tomorrow, the night after that, every night through November 18th, right down here at the Riverwalk. Now really quickly, before I leave this area, take a look off to the right-hand side, specifically at these metal poles that kind of look like they're growing up out of the water. Those are actually part of some fish hotels, floating habitats for the fish who live in the Chicago River. Now there's a local environmental group, the Friends of the Chicago River. They are working really hard to improve the overall health and quality of the water here. They're doing a good job. In the 70s, only 10 different species of fish lived in this water, and today there are almost 80 different species. It did take me a while to get in there and count them all by hand, but we finally got it done. It was cold too. On the left-hand side, this red brick building with the clock tower, this is the Reed Murdoch Center, built in 1914 to be a grocery warehouse. Today, it's the office building for the Encyclopedia Britannica Company.
Guapo. We're going to talk, you're going to sit closer and move to the back just because I think some people are getting distracted.
And this is the most lopsided building in Chicago, and you can tell if you look to the left-hand side of the clock tower, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bays of windows, and to the right-hand side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. In the 20s, LaSalle Street, just behind us, actually had to be widened, so they tore down the left-hand side of this building, widened the street, and then built it back up to match. On the right-hand side, this shorter brown building with the number 55 in large type up at the very top, this is what I like to call the Danny DeVito building. Short, squat, with a ton of personality. And look at the guy. He's hanging out between two beautiful supermodels, just like you know he would. Told you we see some celebrities on this tour. Now 55 West Wackers, it's actually called, is the only example of an architectural style called brutalism that we have on the river. Brutalism is the muscular cousin to black box modernism. It uses really heavy raw material, specifically concrete. Institutions of a strong moral standing love using brutalism, including college campuses, police stations, courthouses, and in this case, the Lakeside Bank. Just next door to the left is the home of the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency, alternating black and gray glass, give it an almost pixelated quality. And even if you have never before heard of Leo Burnett, I can pretty much guarantee you, you are familiar with their work. Because this is where we get classic characters like Tony the Tiger, the Keebler Elves, and the Jolly Green Giant, among many others. Staying on the right-hand side, but going a little bit further down and going up, you'll see this ornate dome coming into view on top of the Jewelers Building. Lots of hot gossip about the Jewelers Building, and I am here to put those rumors to rest. Many people think that notorious gangster Al Capone used to hang out in the nightclub that was once in the dome on top of the Jewelers Building, but we don't have any evidence of it, and I think it'd be too risky. If he got caught up there, he'd be stuck. He wouldn't be able to make a very quick getaway. But if you want to know where Al Capone really did hang out, I will tell you. I will give you the inside scoop, but you have to ask me after the tour. I'm not giving it away that easy. I'm not a snitch, but I will be if you ask me after the tour. Just down the street from the Jewelers Building, my personal favorite, the beautiful green and gold Art Deco style carbide and carbon building. Built as a protest during Prohibition. You won't let us drink champagne? Fine, we'll build a giant bottle of it to overlook the city. That's real gold leaf up at the top of that building. That gold leaf is so thin, it's 1/5000th of an inch, which is half the thickness of saran wrap. So I don't know how much money you'd make, but it sure does look cool. Mather Tower, this ornate rocket ship shaped building right here in the middle. This is Chicago's skinniest skyscraper. The base of this building is 100 feet by 65 feet. The penthouse is only 9 feet across. Just next door is the London Guarantee Building, which is now home to the London House Hotel. And just above that logo, you'll see the glass balconies of the London House Rooftop Bar. That is the second highest rated rooftop bar in the world. You get incredible views of the river and the city, and you do not have to be a guest at the hotel to go up there and check it out. So I highly recommend, especially I think the weather's gonna be nice the next couple of days. Just beyond the Wrigley Building on the left-hand side is the French Gothic Revival style Tribune Tower, formerly home to the Chicago Tribune. It's now more luxury apartments. We say French Gothic Revival style because the top of this building is modeled after a Gothic cathedral in Normandy, France. And if you go to the base of Tribune Tower, built into the walls on the outside, there are artifacts from other famous buildings and structures from all over the world. They have samples from the Great Wall of China, Edinburgh Castle in Scotland, the Berlin Wall, the Great Pyramids of Giza, and many, many, many others. Just in front of Tribune Tower, it is none other than the Apple Store. And this building does have some historical significance. When Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable, the founding father of our city, built his home here, he built it in the same exact location where the Apple Store now stands. There's even a bust of Jean-Baptiste Point du Sable up at the top of that plaza, so you could see for yourself just how devastatingly handsome he really was. Let's stay on the left and look up. You'll see that recognizable peacock-shaped logo on the very front of NBC Tower, which is built to look just like 30 Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. Now that is a spire above the logo. It is not an antenna. And here's the thing about spires. They are purely aesthetic. That means they serve no function other than to look cute and be tall. However, they are included in the overall height of this building because they get included in the original design by the architect, who in this case is actually our old friend Adrian Smith, who designed Trump Tower just behind us. Oh, quick, on the right-hand side, this brown box building, this is James Hardie up at the very top. Whatever you do, do not look at this building. Look at the one just behind it, the wavy balconies of Aqua Tower. Those wavy balconies are meant to mimic rock formations out in southern Illinois. Aqua Tower, also designed by Chicago it girl architect Jeannie Gang. Now, Jeannie Gang loves her kind of organic waves and shapes, and I love Jeannie Gang. How could you not? She's a genius. Genius Gang is sometimes what I like to call her. She won a MacArthur Genius Grant in 2015, and she's recently been selected to be in charge of the redesign of O'Hare Airport. It's an $8 billion project that Jeannie Gang gets to be in charge of. And I want to keep bragging about her, so we're going to go back to her magnum opus, the St. Regis, now on the right-hand side of the river. I promised you we were going to learn about all 3 ways that architects counteract drift, but we've only learned about 2 so far. So let's check out this building. It's got 1, 2, 3 undulating towers that are all bundled together at the base with this shorter, more geometric pattern one here at the very front. So it's got a bundled base, just like the Sears Willis Tower. And if you were to go to the very top floor of the tallest tower on the right-hand side, you would also find inertial slash dampers, those giant tanks of water that help calibrate the sway of the building. But just below that, a couple of floors, you can see 2 that don't have any glass on the outside. They're completely open to the elements, and those are called blow-through floors. They allow the wind to blow directly through the middle of this building. Now, nobody lives up there, but I think that this is probably the most efficient way of counteracting drift. There's not a lot of crazy technology that goes into it. You build a building, you leave 2 floors open, bada bing, bada boom, you're done. But I do think it is kind of the most expensive. And here's my reasoning behind this. The 71st and the 72nd floors at the St. Regis, that's the roof of the middle tower, as well as the floor directly next to it on the right-hand side. Those 2 floors, all summer, were under contract to be sold for $18.5 million.
Oh.
But they didn't sell for $18.5. They sold for $20.5 million when that contract was finalized about a month ago. So you can imagine just how much money they are losing by letting the blow-through floors remain open, but it's for a good reason, so that people don't get too seasick when they go up inside the St. Regis. And you know what? You can't really miss what you never had, right? Right? Just kidding. All right, we're headed out again and towards Navy Pier, but let's follow Lakeshore Drive off towards the left-hand side to this beautiful black tri-lobed building just at the base of Navy Pier. This is Lake Point. I've walked by it on your way into the tour today. Lots of hot gossip about Lake Point Tower too. How could there not be? Plenty of celebrities have lived here, including Tom Cruise, Sammy Sosa, Kurt Russell, Goldie Hawn, among many, many, many others. And there's also a pretty nice, pretty fancy French restaurant in that circular structure on the very top of Lake Point Tower. It's called Cité, C-I-T-E. It is very fancy, or très chic as the French would say. I wouldn't stress out too much about getting a view of that skyline right now because we'll have an opportunity to do it once we head out here. But just beyond Lake Point Tower is, of course, Navy Pier, one of Chicago's greatest cultural attractions. Navy Pier was part of the Burnham Plan of 1909. It was originally named Municipal Pier, and it was renamed to honor fallen Navy personnel after World War I. Tons of fun stuff to do out on Navy Pier. The Children's Museum is out there. The Ferris wheel is up and running. Chicago Shakespeare Theater just opened their new production of Measure for Measure. The country's largest rooftop bar is at the very end of the pier. And if you want a really incredible view of the entirety of the Chicago skyline, you can take any one of Shoreline Sightseeing's 40-minute lakefront cruises from any of our docks out on Navy Pier. But we've got a pretty great view of the skyline going on right here, right now, just behind us. And I won't make you crane your neck for very long. We're gonna hang out in this area for a few minutes. Captain Ben is gonna turn the boat around so you get an unobstructed view of that skyline and the gorgeous sunset that's happening right now. I will do what I did before, hop off the mic, wander around, so holler at me if you have any questions that I may have missed the first time around. The bar is closed. This is gonna be your last chance to use the restroom because in just a few minutes, we're gonna head back into the dock at Navy Pier and we will call it a wrap on the final steps of our red carpet cruise. Thank you.
Thank you. Ay, guwapo kayo sa silo.
In what way? He lives there now?
Yeah.
Oh. Oh, no, no. Saya sultan mo kanina.
Sabaan mo to, bro. Wala rin, wala. Ha?
Wala man.
Wala rin to.
Di ko sa lagi yung sultan. Kamu dong, kali dong.
Sige. Yan ba sila si?
Kani pa. Sige.
Sa Tagana pa, marang pilihan mo ah.
Ay, tuyok, tuyok, tuyok.
Redo. Cheese.
Cheese!
Git
Git.
Okay, flush?
Ano? Window kay real seal.
Services.